the Steelers roster heading into this season. So, like, who are going to determine how the 2023 season goes? I think there's some obvious ones in there. I'm hoping that we can kind of differentiate on some of these as we go down our lists. Let's start with some that I think we can agree on. Kenny Pickett, year 2 leap. Like, it needs to happen for this offense to be able to keep up. You look at the AFC when you got to compete with Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, like the quarterbacks around the AFC, Aaron Rodgers now in the AFC. Say Sean Payton does resurrect Russell Wilson. Like, the AFC quarterbacks compared to the NFC quarterbacks is
as much as I don't want to bring him up, Deshaun Watson in the division.
Yeah. If he finds his 2020 form, yeah. I mean, just within the division alone could be insane. You need Kenny Pickett to take that year 2 leap. And you kind of look at the ecosystem that they're putting him in. I know a lot of people are going to be questioning, and ourselves included. We've harped on it. We didn't want him back this year. Obviously, the offensive coordinator is like the one thing that you look at immediately and say, this could hamstring this guy. But you look at everything else that they've put around him. They've built around him, the way that they've kind of redone the offensive line. They've, kind of replenished the skill positions, added a blocking tight end. It sounds like they're going more to play action this year, potentially, if OTAs are any indication. A year 2, like, nothing else matters if Kenny Pickett doesn't take a leap in year 2.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Kenny Pickett is also one of my top 5. I think it's clear cut, and I will say that is my only offensive player that I have, and I feel like that, and we conversed a little bit before about our list, just so we weren't saying the exact same things, or we might be saying the exact same things, just so we had a somewhat idea. Neither of us are saying offensive linemen either, any of them, and I think that could be surprising to some people, just because you've got a lot of new faces along that offensive line. And so I
think as a whole they're important. I just can't single out one and say that guy is the most important.
Yeah, neither can I. But Kenny Pickett is so obvious for the reasons you were saying. How competitive the AFC is at quarterback position, which when you compare the AFC to the NFC now, it's an absolute joke.
Yeah,
I mean it's like comparing.
How many guys from the NFC? I mean, seriously, real quick, not to stray too far away from the topic at hand. How many quarterbacks in the NFC can you fit into your top 10?
Like top 10 quarterbacks in the league?
Yeah. I mean, Jalen Hurts is obvious.
Maybe 2.
Yeah, I know I've always been higher on Dak. And like, I know last year he had like a ridiculous turnover outlier season, but like, he was part of a YouTube video I just recently made on my personal channel. But I think Dak is for sure in the top 10, and then obviously Hurts as to be kind of in that upper echelon at this point with the year he just had. Outside of those 2, I think the other 8 might be in the AFC.
See, I wasn't even thinking Dak, and it's probably just recency bias because of how bad of a year he is. Although recency bias is ironic because the person I was going to say, a healthy Matt Stafford, I think you could make the argument for it.
But I don't know. Said maybe 2. I thought the other was going to be Kirk Cousins. So that's where I thought you were.
No, only if he's playing at 1 p.m.
Yeah, or like last year, Geno Smith.
Geno Smith. But I mean, going off 1 year, I don't think I could put him in the top 10. He has to repeat that.
Jared Goff had a nice year, but I'm saying, like, guys were bringing up exactly like that's a top 5 of the NFC though.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, realistically, there's one guy in the NFC that could compete for like MVP conversations. At least realistically, what we would estimate MVP conversation. Mm-hmm. There's like 5 or 6 in the AFC. Yeah. So I think it's a huge importance for Kenny Pickett to take that leap. I mean, the offense needs it, and we saw that in progression as the season went on. That second half from Kenny was really good down the stretch of the season. We saw those improvements, especially in those later games in the season that we saw with the Raiders and the Ravens. We saw the late game comebacks. We're starting to see the signs of everything that you want to see from a franchise quarterback in his first season. Now he needs to take that step in year 2, and I think the offense has all the weapons to do so. And so it is really, the ball is in Kenny's court, and he has to take the keys and ride with it. Another guy we should just get right out of the way because we both have him. Everybody should have him. TJ Watt. We saw the
shocker
this guy was.
Yeah.
Whenever he was not on the field, it changes the dynamic of the entire defense when TJ Watt is not in the lineup. And so when you have the best pass rusher, it's hard not to put him. And I which one would you say is more important, TJ Watt or Kenny Pickett, in terms of like most important to success in the 2023 season?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. He's not a better player. He's not a better player in his position, but I'm still saying Kenny.
Yeah,
I just think I think again, I like that's how I closed out my argument for him being. And I don't think I had to make the argument for him being one of the 5 most important Steelers. But
right.
I just think everything else goes right, but he's not. He doesn't take that leap. None of it matters. Like that's just how I'm viewing it. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with you, and I would still say Kenny Pickett just because I mean he plays the most important position, and he's got to take that leap. But I think someone could make the argument for TJ, and I could get around to it just because you saw literally what the defense looked like last year without him, and they couldn't stop to run to save their life, which is ironic because we think of TJ as just like a pass rusher because of all the dynamic plays he makes rushing the quarterback, but you don't realize how much he does in the run game as well. And you saw the defense suffer from that, which clearly franchise player, best pass rusher in football. He's got to be in the top 5. And then after that, there's one more that we have, I think, and this would pretty much be a consensus with everybody. Minkah Fitzpatrick, the struggles that they had in the back end and the players that they don't have anymore in the back end. They've lost a lot of depth that they had back there with the absence of Terrell Edmonds, Cam Sutton. There's a lot of new faces back there, but Minkah is one of the guys that has been like, and you were saying it to me before the show, and it is so weird that he's like the 3rd longest tenured player on the Steelers defense already. And I was thinking about it. This is going to be his 5th season in a Steeler uniform. It does not feel like that because he got here in 2019, has played 4 seasons already. It's crazy, but he's I mean, in our estimation, probably, I don't know if he is for you, is still like the best free safety in football. I've viewed him that over his career. I mean, there's arguments to be made for other people, but always obviously going to have that Steelers bias. But yeah, it's hard to not make a top 5 and not have Minkah Fitzpatrick in there.
Yeah, and I think they kind of go hand in hand. Like for TJ, I think that they've built their team through that pass rush. So like when you don't have that, it's why they don't invest as much as they typically do in corners. And I know that they spent, the 32nd overall pick on a corner. They end up double dipping the 7th round, but you still look at that cornerback room. It's, not something that they're really willing to throw like high end assets at or a bunch of money at because they always want to create through the pass rush. When you lose that pass rush like they did last year when TJ was out for a long period of time, you see that get exposed a little bit, and it's a completely different defense. It's just not built to handle his absence. In Minkah's case, like you mentioned, think about when he got here in 2019. He was playing in the secondary with Terrell Edmonds, Joe Hayden, Mike Hilton, Cam Sutton, and Steven Nelson. Look at who's left from that group. It's crazy to think about that Minkah's the only guy left from that defensive backs group. But he's now, I mean, he always has been so important to what they do on defense. He can wear so many different hats. Obviously he's found, his home at free safety, but when they bring him down, as a robber, they can throw him in the slot a little bit too. He can do a lot of different things for them on defense, and it's been a seamless fit for him here. He's super important on the back end just because from a communication standpoint, and also just from, his ability, it's hard to find a better player at his position in the league. Like, I agree. I think my bias plays into a little bit. There's an argument that could probably be made for like 3 or 4 different guys that play that position that they're the best in the league. But Minkah's certainly one of the top 5 most important players for me for what they're going to do in 2023. If you lose him, you look at that safety group and KZ, and I mean, maybe at that point you move Keanu Neal to the back end, even though we expect to see him play some linebacker, or like Trey Norwood. I mean, it could get really dicey.
The middle of the field and pass coverage down the field could be pretty open.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So now maybe we could have some differences here. I want to preface by saying Cam Hayward is the glue of that defense and everything that they do. He's kind of all the highlights, all the credit that TJ gets. I don't know that it's possible without a guy like Cam Hayward doing what he does in the middle of that defensive line. He absolutely is one of their more important players. But for sake of being a little bit different, I want some different directions here, just because let's start with my one that I want here with Cole Holcomb. I look at what the Steelers have gotten from the middle linebacker position for the better part of 5 years now, like really since Ryan Shazier got hurt. Devin Bush's rookie season was okay, and it looked like year 2 was going well for him until he tore that ACL. But really, I mean, the majority of middle linebacker play they've gotten since that injury has been horrific. I think when you look at the commitment that they've made to Cole Holcomb, 3 years, relatively significant money, they must feel really good about that foot, and they feel like they have their solution here. I think if he isn't, at least short term, I think they hope he's a long-term guy. I mean, still just 26 years old. If he isn't at least the short-term solution at this position, and we're having this same conversation next year about off-ball linebacker again, I think things went south for this defense. I think you need better linebacker play in 2023 than you've had for the last 5 years, or they're not going to be able to maintain as one of the top, 10 defenses in the NFL without it.
Yeah, I agree. The linebacker play has to improve. It's been really bad for the Steelers for the better part of like 4 to 5 years now overall as a complete unit. So, and when you go from last year, you look at the guys who played the most snaps, all 3 of those guys are gone. So the fact that you have such a turnover and Mark Robinson is probably your most tenured linebacker, that's a little concerning. At least tenured in a Steeler uniform. And I will go to the vanilla answer. I'll go Cam Hayward. I mean, it's hard to leave him off, and I know it probably hurts you a little bit to leave him off. But you had to. Linebacker is very important, but so is Cam Hayward. What he means to that defense and what he means to that defensive front, even at 34 years old, still one of the top 5 defensive tackles in the NFL, which is amazing at this point in his career to still be considered one of those top end guys. And then I think it's important, not just because of what he does while he's on the field, but like you look at if he comes off, a lot changes on that defensive line. There's not a huge amount of depth behind him. I mean, you got DeMarvin Leal, who's kind of like an in-betweener of like, is he an outside guy? Isn't he an inside guy? We don't really know what he is. And then they brought in guys like Armon Watts, and then Braden Fajoku and Montavious Adams. They're more like deep, like nose tackles than actual like D tackles. So outside of Larry Ogunjobi, I mean, Cam Hayward is the clear cut. I mean, Larry Ogunjobi is not better than Cam Hayward. Let me rephrase what I'm saying. But he's the only guy that you really have confidence in outside of Cam Hayward at that position right now. And even then, Larry Ogunjobi, a lot of people probably think he could have not lived up to the stuff, but he got that contract anyway for the Steelers. And so I think he needs to play better into his contract, but this makes the importance of Cam Hayward even more because of the concern that you could have with a guy like Larry Ogunjobi. Cam Hayward is just so important on that defensive front. Like you were saying too, he makes the outside guys' lives easier as well for Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt. So yeah, Cam Hayward, even at 34 years old, still one of the top 5 most important players on this team.
I think too, I don't know if you said his name and I missed it, but Keanu Benton, who they just drafted.
Keanu Benton, yeah, I did.
Like, I think from a standpoint of what I'm going to talk about here with my last guy that I want to bring up, of Cam Hayward's role also kind of being about taking that guy under his wing and kind of helping him in his development. That plays into how important he is too to this team, because he needs to kind of groom Keanu Benton to be the next guy along that defensive line.
That's true. And I didn't even mention him. I wasn't even thinking about for that purpose. I didn't mention Benton mainly because I think he's going to be the starting nose tackle.
Yeah.
So I don't even think he's going to be competing for playing time with the likes of Hayward. But it does make sense from just he's on the defensive line with me, take him under my wing and train him. I'm the veteran guy. That makes 100% sense.
So my last guy that I'm going to go with here, and I don't know how productive he's going to be. There's only one football. You said you only had one guy on the offensive side. I have a second guy. It was mainly because of I saw George Pickens talking about Allen Robinson and kind of just how quickly he's came in here and got the ear of every other receiver in that room and kind of just immediately gained their respect and got their attention. Allen Robinson to me is one of the more important players on this roster, because for a long time we've been talking about needing a leader in that wide receiver room. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think Deontay Johnson is a good leader from a non-vocal perspective, but you need that guy too. Like Allen Robinson seems to be more willing to speak up, be able to offer knowledge to other guys. And he's been there and done that a little bit more than Deontay Johnson has. He's a little bit more of a seasoned veteran. I still think he can offer something on the field, but this to me is really more about teaching these guys some stuff in terms of just off the field. Like, I think he's going to be a really good mentor for these guys. Like, maybe physically he can't do everything that he used to be able to, but he can pass along that knowledge to those guys so that they can. So you talk about bringing up, a second year George Pickett. I still think Deontay Johnson could still learn more. I know that he's going into his 5th year in the league, but like, I don't think he's, done learning how to play the wide receiver position. And then you talk about Calvin Austin, who we didn't get to see any love last year. And a lot of people are talking about like, that's the guy kind of maybe competing for who's going to see the most snaps in the slot. I think he could help bring him along too. So to me, the addition of Allen Robinson was super important for that wide receiver room. So I think he's important. Not obviously, I do think he, like I said, still has something left in the tank and can help from a football perspective, but also in just helping bring along a group that is very unproven and like very young. Deontay Johnson at 26 without Allen Robinson would have been the elder statesman of that room. So I think it was a very welcome addition.
All right. Well, I'll just go to that guy on the defense. Patrick Peterson. I'll say he rounds out my top 5. Pretty similar reasons. Not only because of what he can do on the field, but what he can do off it, training those young guys. Because you look at the cornerback room for the Steelers. I mean, outside of Patrick Peterson, I would say Levi Wallace is the most like tenured or most veteran type of player after him. But then after that, I mean, you have Joey Porter Jr., Corey Trice, and then there's guys like James Pierre, who's had several seasons in the NFL but hasn't had a ton of playing time, could still use that veteran presence. I mean, Luke Barku, the guy that got brought in a few weeks ago, another young guy that could still use some veteran presence and use that knowledge to his advantage. I think that Patrick Peterson, with the career that he's had, I mean, what better player to be able to come in and teach these young guys how to play that cornerback position for what level he played it at for most of his career. And I think for an on-the-field perspective, I mean, we've talked about him a lot. Like, what's he going to be doing on the field, whether he's playing like outside? Is he going to be playing that slot role like we had talked about, maybe bumping him into there and having Joey Porter Jr. and Levi Wallace on the outside? I mean, that's still to be seen, and that will be revealed as the summer goes on and we get into camp and everything. But I think that there is definitely some questions as to like, how can Patrick Peterson best fit this team and best be a productive player in this secondary. But also, like you're saying, with Allen Robinson and the young wide receiver core, he can usher in a new cornerback core for the Steelers and really be a veteran presence for them and teach them a lot as well.
I mean, what a better guy to lean on, especially for, Porter Jr. and Trice coming in, just because like you look at Peterson was kind of an anomaly for a good portion of his career. Like, with how big he is, you don't see corners like that typically. Like, obviously everybody immediately points to like the Legion of Boom corners with Sherman and Browner, but like at Peterson's size, like there weren't many guys like that play in the position. And now it's obviously becoming a little bit more regular, these 6'1", 6'2" plus corners. But yeah, I mean, what a great mentor, second most interceptions among active players. Like, this is, the guy to learn from. So I think that's a great pick. I think we covered a lot of bases with our